Disaster. Wavell hops in a light Magister aircraft and sets off for the front, hugging the ground the whole way to escape the attention of the Luftwaffe. As Wavell flies, he realises that his field commanders have lost control of the battle that Britain has pinned all its hopes upon. The Western Desert Force is now in danger of being destroyed by Rommel's panzers. But by the time Wavell arrives at the front, the decisive decision has already been made in his absence. A decision that will have a major impact on Wavell, the future of the North African campaign, the Middle East, and the war as a whole. Battleaxe is an incredibly important battle that has massive tactical and strategic implications for both sides of the war. Yet this is a battle unknown to many and not very well documented. Today, we change that. Unaware that Hitler is about to launch Operation Barbarossa, the chiefs of staff in London believe that the war is poised on a knife edge and that the British Empire is in deepening peril. Rommel lands in Libya, launches his first offensive, defeats the British in Cyrenaica, surrounds Tobruk and reaches the Egyptian frontier. Will the Germans blitzkrieg through North Africa and through Turkey? Will they descend upon the Middle East and undo the British Empire? The British know that they have to do something. The formidable menace of the invasion of Egypt by the German army in Cyrenaica, supported by large Italian forces with German stiffening, remains our chief preoccupation in the Middle East. They attempt to turn back Rommel, launching Operation Brevity, which ends in failure. After Brevity, the strategic picture looks bleak for the British. On the German side, Hitler is about to launch his invasion of the Soviet Union. For him, the North African front is just a sideshow, although he certainly doesn't want his ally Italy being knocked out of the war. He therefore sends Rommel and 2 divisions to North Africa. Disobeying orders, Rommel advances. He knocks out the British 2nd Armoured Division, surrounds Tobruk and reaches the Egyptian frontier. Rommel's main concern is supply, and so he needs to end the Tobruk siege. His first attempts fail, but he does counter one British attempt to relieve Tobruk, Operation Brevity. During Operation Brevity, the Germans lose possession of the Halfaya Pass. The Halfaya Pass is an important strategic position as it's the only way into Libya unless you outflank it to the south. The problem is, if you outflank it, your supply suffers because you have to go the long way round. Therefore, the Halfaya Pass is a vital position for both sides. Rommel considers the success of Kampfgruppen von Herth and Kramer during Operation Brevity. He concludes that small, battalion-sized ad hoc units, Kampfgruppen or battle groups, offer greater flexibility in reacting to their tactical situations. Rommel doesn't invent the concept of Kampfgruppen, but Brevity shows him how useful this concept is. So he puts it to the test, just 10 days after Brevity during Operation Skorpion. In Skorpion, Rommel is determined to retake the Halfaya Pass and deny its use to the British. The Germans have 160 tanks, and Herth uses them on the 27th of May to attack the 3rd Battalion Coldstream Guards on top of the Halfaya Pass. His plan, Fall Skorpion, Case Skorpion, is to use 3 Kampfgruppen from a combination of units from 15th Panzer and 5th Light Divisions. These 3 Kampfgruppen have 3 different commanders, but they all come under the overall command of Oberst von Herth. Early in the day on the 27th of May, they strike the Halfaya Pass. 3rd Battalion Coldstream Guards, supported by a handful of Matildas and a single battery of 25-pounder guns, cannot stem the onslaught and are overrun in less than 2 hours. Recognising the danger, Strafer Gott then orders the Halfaya garrison to abandon the pass, leaving 173 soldiers killed, wounded or taken prisoner, as well as 5 Matildas, 4 field guns and 8 anti-tank guns lost. In one decisive stroke, the last and only British gain from Operation Brevity, is taken. It must be remembered that everything we send out to the Middle East is out of action for the best part of 3 months, as it has to go around the Cape. Wavell sends messages home, warning them that the Afrika Korps has been strengthened by the arrival of the 15th Panzer Division, and that British equipment, especially tanks, are not on par with German panzers. Having received Wavell's messages, Churchill makes a crucial and drastic decision. Overriding all objections at home, he orders a naval convoy, Tiger Convoy, with 295 new and reconditioned tanks through the Mediterranean rather than take the long way round the Cape of Africa. The fate of the war in the Middle East, the loss of the Suez Canal, the frustration or confusion of the enormous forces we have built up in Egypt, the closing of all American cooperation through the Red Sea, all may turn on a few hundred armoured vehicles. This is a strategic gamble that, luckily, works. Only one ship is lost, along with 57 tanks. On the 12th of May, the rest of the 238 Tiger Cubs, as the tanks are nicknamed, reach the Middle East. 82 cruisers, 135 Matilda tanks and 21 light tanks arrive with Tiger Convoy. But the unloading of these tanks takes longer than expected. One vessel has to be diverted to Port Said as the cranes at Alexandria aren't strong enough to offload the heaviest of armour. All of the tanks have to be fitted with sand filters and repainted in desert camouflage, and a lot need a complete overhaul. But even though Tiger Convoy has arrived, there's only enough tanks to equip 1 brigade of 3 cruiser regiments and 1 brigade of 3 infantry tank regiments. Worse, it's as though they're starting from scratch with the 7th Armoured Division, who had no tanks before this, and had not actually existed as a unit for months. The tank crews are unfamiliar with their vehicles. The organisation as a whole has to be reformed. This new division would be pit up against seasoned soldiers. Basically, the only experienced unit of the division is Strafe's support group. This all results in a delay, and the battle can't start until the first week of June. Worse, Wavell himself, who's been working hard to make Battleaxe a reality, is somewhat pessimistic. I think it's right to inform you that the measure of success which will attend this operation is, in my opinion, doubtful. I hope that it will succeed in driving enemy west of Tobruk and re-establishing land communications with Tobruk. If possible, we will exploit success further, but recent operations have disclosed some disquieting features. The disquieting features are that the light armour and armoured cars of the British are vulnerable to the German armoured cars. The slowness of the I-tanks and the fact that the cruisers have little in power or speed over German medium tanks is also concerning. But Wavell is under constant pressure by Churchill to attack at once. Just like with Brevity and other operations before them, there can be no delay. After the Royal Navy captures an Enigma machine on the 9th of May 1941, the British have an enhanced capacity to read enemy signals. Paulus's report of Rommel's supply situation is intercepted at Bletchley Park, and ultra-intelligence convinces Churchill that an opportunity exists to strike a decisive blow. Churchill finds the delays frustrating, especially since Wavell remains so pessimistic about the prospect of success. Churchill either does not understand or does not care about the enormous burden he places upon Wavell. You have, at the present moment, 530,000 soldiers on your ration strength, some 500 field guns, 350 anti-aircraft guns, 450 heavy tanks and 350 anti-tank guns. In the months of January and May, upwards of 7,000 mechanical vehicles have reached you. Yet you are evidently hard put to find a brigade or even a battalion, and in continual telegrams you complain of your shortage of transport, which you declare limits all your operations. But Wavell has vast responsibilities. His command spans 9 countries, It's over 2 continents, and he has scant resources to defend this vast tract. In addition, he has diplomatic duties to deal with: the French in Syria and North Africa, consultations with the ambassadors in Egypt and Iraq, the Governor General in the Sudan and the High Commissioner for Palestine and Transjordan, the governors of Cyprus, Aden and British Somaliland, and the political agent in the Persian Gulf. And for all this, Wavell has a headquarters staff of just 5 officers. Most of the troops under his command aren't regulars, or aren't capable of facing the Germans. For example, in Palestine is the 1st Cavalry Division. A cavalry force isn't going to do much against German panzers. And of course, Churchill knows next to nothing about desert warfare, whereas Wavell has plenty of experience. Things have changed since Operation Compass in 1940, where they faced what was essentially an army unprepared for war. Wavell refuses to just throw equipment at the Germans in the hopes of victory again. And so he sends a confidential report to London on May 28th, admitting his concerns about the coming operation. Our infantry tanks are really too slow for a battle in the desert and have been suffering considerable casualties from the fire of the enemy's powerful anti-tank guns. Our cruisers have little advantage in power or speed over German medium tanks. Technical breakdowns are still too numerous. Rommel's advance to the border of Egypt isn't all good. In March of 1941, Halder asks Rommel how he's going to solve the supply problems the Afrika Korps is suffering under. Rommel's reply is, "That's your pigeon." Halder never forgave him for the barb and began circulating the rumour among his fellow senior officers that Rommel's grasp of logistics was weak, if not positively feeble, the beginnings of a myth that continues to persist. In addition to circulating rumours, General Paulus is sent by Halder to report on the situation in North Africa, and surprisingly, he concludes that Rommel is dangerously deficient in fuel and ammunition. But despite his mad dash across the desert, Rommel's supply situation isn't really his fault. As several historians point out, had Halder and the General Staff done their jobs right, they would have foreseen the impossibility of supplying a Panzer Corps in Africa. They take the Italians at their word when they say, yes, we can easily supply German panzer divisions in Libya. The reality is that Italian ports aren't designed to take this amount of equipment. Rommel's 2 divisions required 700 tons of supplies per day just to get by. During attacks, that figure doubles. And the Italian ports barely maintain them in the field, even though 80% of supplies from Italy do in fact reach the ports. This is why Rommel's failure to take Tobruk places him in a stalemate situation. If he could take Tobruk, he would have another port nearer the front to supply his troops, relieving his supply problems a little bit. But seeing the problem of supply, Paulus and Halder order Rommel not to advance further. He is to take up defensive positions to conserve his assets. They don't want to give Rommel any more resources, and they're not really interested in advancing further in Egypt. Their main concern is the Soviet Union, which Rommel doesn't know about. So Rommel has little choice but to settle for the defence, waiting for the British to attack him. Rommel also has to deal with a big problem: the reorganisation of his own officer corps. He's determined to create a staff who will obey his orders rather than debate them. Strike, who continues to question Rommel's orders, knows he will be replaced. On May 16th, Rommel telephones Strike's headquarters and announces, "Strike, I have asked for you to be replaced. You will continue in command, however, until your successor arrives." "Does the general have any further orders?" Strike replies before cutting the communication before Rommel's able to say anything. When Strike's replacement arrives on the last day of May, Rommel tries to explain to Strike the reason he wants rid of him. He says he can no longer tolerate Strike's habit of questioning orders, and that Strike's been too interested in the welfare of his men. Strike replies, "Herr General, I can imagine no greater words of praise for a divisional commander." And then he's gone. The thing is, Strike's words sting Rommel, as Rommel had placed his soldiers during World War I and the early part of World War II as one of his highest priorities. The issue is that Rommel's priorities have shifted since he himself had been a divisional commander just months before. In Libya, Rommel is compelled to take a broader view of everything in North Africa to better plan and understand the campaign. He was being compelled by his position to think like a strategist, and strategy, however subtle, requires a willingness to be ruthless in its execution, which is rarely demanded at the tactical or operational level. This was a burden Strike as a divisional commander never had to shoulder. The misfortune of the two men, who had begun their time in Africa by working so well together, was that both were right, according to the perspective given to them by their levels of command. But the realities of war demanded that Rommel's point of view prevail. Strike's replacement is General Lieutenant Ravenstein, a fighting man who has little time for staff work. The next to go is Lieutenant Albrecht of 5th Panzer Regiment. He argues with Rommel as well, although in this case it's probably the result of a clash of personalities rather than differing command styles. Major Ernst Bollbrinker takes temporary command of 5th Panzer Regiment, and Colonel von Herth, whose effectiveness during Operation Brevity has significantly impressed Rommel, is given temporary command of the 15th Panzer Division. Herth commands the division until the new commander, Neumann Cyclo, arrives around the 26th of May. So with all these moves, the German forces in Africa look like this. We have Rommel's Afrika Korps with 2 divisions, Neumann Cyclo's 15th Panzer Division and Ravenstein's 5th Light Division. General Neumann Cyclo's 15th Panzer Division consists of a headquarters unit, 8th Panzer Regiment with 1st and 2nd Panzer Battalions, 15th Motorised Schutzen Brigade with 104th Schutzen Regiment, itself consisting of Bach's 1st Motorised Machine Gun Battalion and 2nd Motorised Machine Gun Battalion, and 115th Schutzen Regiment consisting of 2 more Motorised Machine Gun Battalions. There's 15th Motorcycle Battalion, 33rd Reconnaissance Battalion, 33rd Artillery Regiment, 33rd Panzerjäger Anti-Tank Battalion, 33rd Pioneer or Engineer Battalion, and 33rd Signals Battalion. Then we have Ravenstein's 5th Light Division. This consists of its divisional staff unit, with Lieutenant Seaborn's Signal Battalion, Interception Unit, as part of that. Bollbrinker's 5th Panzer Regiment of 2 battalions, with 96 tanks at this time, 200 Schutzen Regiment with 2nd and 8th Machine Gun Battalions, 1st of 75th Artillery Regiment, 39th Panzerjäger Anti-Tank Battalion, 605th Self-Propelled Heavy Panzerjäger Battalion, 3rd Reconnaissance Battalion, 606th Flak Battalion, and Pioneer Battalion ZBV 200. Overall, the Germans have approximately 160 tanks for Battleaxe. But the small Panzer I and II tanks with their thin armour, machine guns or cannon are not really effective against British tanks and are only really useful in reconnaissance roles or as support against soft targets like infantry. A good portion of the Afrika Korps tank strength is therefore not capable of taking out enemy tanks. But at this point in the war, the overall quality of the German Panzer III and IV tanks in firepower, protection and reliability is superior to anything the British can field. The Panzer III has a 50mm gun and is capable of defeating the British cruiser tanks. At 30mm it also has thicker armour than the cruiser tanks at this stage. The Panzer IV has a short barreled 75mm gun, making it primarily useful in the infantry support role rather than as a tank killer. But it has even thicker armour than the Panzer III, and its gun has a far greater range than any other tank on the field right now. Both the Panzer III and the Panzer IV are capable of using HE, high explosive rounds, making them effective against infantry and artillery. In terms of anti-tank guns, the 37mm and 50mm pack guns are capable of destroying the British cruiser tanks, but not the Matildas. The 88mm guns are the only weapons that can tackle the Matildas from the front, but they can do this at far range. British tanks must engage at close range in order to fire back at the 88mm gun, making the 88 a very deadly weapon. These equipment and organisational advantages will have a significant impact on the coming Battleaxe battle. The Western Desert Force has a new commander, Lieutenant General Sir Noel Beresford-Pearce, who we have seen in previous battles. Beresford-Pearce's Western Desert Force consists of Major General Cray's 7th Armoured Division, Major General Messervy's 4th Indian Division, and 22nd Guards Brigade. Let's take a look at these units in turn. Major General Cray's 7th Armoured Division consists of Gatehouse's 4th Armoured Brigade, which has O'Carroll's 4th Royal Tank Regiment with Matildas, and 7th Royal Tank Regiment with Matildas. There's also Russell's 7th Armoured Brigade, which has 2nd Royal Tank Regiment with mixed cruisers, 6th Royal Tank Regiment with Crusader tanks, and the 3rd King's Own Hussars with mainly light tanks. And who can forget Gott's support group, with 1st Battalion King's Royal Rifle Corps, 2nd Battalion the Rifle Brigade, 3rd Regiment Royal Horse Artillery, 4th Regiment Royal Horse Artillery, and 1st Battalion Light Anti-Aircraft Regiment Royal Artillery. Then there's 22nd Guards Brigade, with 2nd Battalion Scots Guards, Marlborough's 3rd Battalion Coldstream Guards, and 1st Battalion the Bus Royal East Kent Regiment. Finally, there's Major General Messervy's 4th Indian Division, with Brigadier Savory's 11th Indian Infantry Brigade, itself consisting of 2nd Battalion Cameron Highlanders, 1st Battalion 6th Rapunzel Rifles, and 2nd Battalion 5th Marathas. There's also a few Indian artillery units along with this division. All British cruisers and heavy tanks are armed with a 2-pounder anti-tank gun. The British 2-pounders are effective against any German tanks in the field at this time, at 500 yards or less. The issue is that while the 2-pounders can defeat any German tank, they can't do so at long ranges. In order to defeat tanks at long ranges, just like the Germans do with their 88s, the British have to rely on their 25-pounder artillery howitzers. Now, for 7th Armoured Division, these 25-pounders are mainly concentrated in Gott's support group. And Gott's support group is usually behind the lines because it doesn't have tanks. Therefore, during this battle, the support group have no armour, and 7th Armoured Brigade have no artillery. And both would function as 2 separate commands, and although they would cooperate during Battleaxe, there's no effective coordination between the 2 units. The British cruiser tanks at this stage are faster than the German tanks, but aren't very heavily armoured. Even the new Crusaders aren't much better. The British don't realise it yet since they haven't had a chance to train in these tanks, but amongst other things, the Crusader has a faulty water pump that's prone to leaking. Since there aren't ample quantities of water in a desert, the Crusaders have an annoying habit of breaking down. They also like to set alight when hit, so effectively they're constantly thirsty and then burst into flames. Luckily, the British do have a good tank, the I tank or Matilda II tank, and this tank is heavily armoured. Its armour is impregnable to German tank shells at over 200 metres in range. But the 88s will go right through it. As mentioned earlier, Wavell is concerned because British light armour and armoured cars are vulnerable to the superior German armoured cars. This means the British struggle to do any reconnaissance before the battle, as they're constantly chased away by the better German reconnaissance vehicles. All of these material disadvantages have a significant impact on the coming battle. Wavell issues orders for the creation of a battle plan for Battleaxe on the 1st of May 1941. Battleaxe has a firm stated aim, the destruction of Rommel's forces and to achieve a decisive victory in North Africa. After some time, Wavell flies to meet with Beresford Pierce and Cray, who brief him on their plan for Battleaxe. Beresford Pierce has never commanded an armoured force before, and his 3-phase battle plan lacks originality. It's basically a rerun of Brevity. This guy is not O'Connor, who we've seen making bold dashes across the desert during Operation Compass. And Wavell is not impressed, believing this plan doesn't make full use of British resources, especially of artillery. He gives instructions to create another plan that employs maximum strength in artillery and infantry. Eventually, after 3 goes, a plan is created. The battle is to be split into 3 stages. The first phase is to capture the frontier posts at the Hellfire Pass, Fort Capuzzo and Sollum. Major General Frank Messervy's 4th Indian Division, with Matilda tanks of 4th Armoured Brigade in support, will form this attack. Cray's 7th Armoured Division will cover the left flank of the Indian Division and provide support. In the second phase, 4th Indian and 7th Armoured Divisions will break through to Tobruk and El Adam, linking up with the Australians defending Tobruk. In the third phase, with Tobruk relieved, everyone will push towards Derna and Machili. But it's obvious even to Wavell at this time that there are flaws in this plan. There's no reserves. So once this attack is on, there's nothing left to exploit with. Without reserves, the British attack is going to be a gamble. If it failed, there were no reserves to bolster the front against a German counterattack. If it succeeded, there was no means to follow it up and ensure a German retreat. And this is all assuming that the British can pull off the first phase of the battle. To accomplish this first phase, capturing Hellfire Pass, Capuzzo and Sollum, two groups are created, the Coast Force and the Escarpment Force. Brigadier Savori's the Coast Force has the job of taking the Hellfire Pass. So as to surround the Germans at the pass, Savori splits his force into two smaller groups. The first group is the Halfaya group, at the top of the escarpment, with 2nd Battalion Cameron Highlanders and B Squadron from 4th Royal Tank Regiment. And the second group is 11th Indian Infantry Brigade group at the bottom of the escarpment. This has 2 battalions of infantry, 1st Battalion 6th Rapunja Rifles and 2nd Battalion 5th Marathas, and 2 squadrons of tanks from 4th Royal Tank Regiment, A and C squadrons. With these forces taking on Halfaya and then Sollum, Major General Messervy's the Escarpment Force is tasked with capturing Point 206 and then moving up to Merced and Capuzzo. Messervy has 22nd Guards Brigade Group with 2nd Battalion Scots Guards, Lieutenant Colonel Mowbray's 3rd Battalion Coldstream Guards and 1st Battalion the Buffs Royal East Kent Regiment. And it has 4th Armoured Brigade with 7th Royal Tank Regiment. 7th Armoured Division with 7th Armoured Brigade in the support group, so without 4th Armoured Brigade, is tasked with taking the Hafid Ridge. Interestingly, Rommel, in his first encounter ever with British forces at Arras in May 1940, had met 4th and 7th Royal Tank Regiments of 4th Armoured Brigade, and the next time he would meet them again was now, at Fort Capuzzo during Battleaxe. 7th Armoured Brigade is specifically tasked with engaging and destroying Rommel's panzers, and if this part of the plan works, Wavell hopes that the rest of Battleaxe will just fall into place. What Wavell doesn't know is that his plan is based on faulty intelligence that tells him that 2/3 of the German tank strength is at Tobruk. That's not the case. Not completely satisfied with his supply situation, Rommel turns his attention to training his infantry, including the Italian infantry, on tactics to overcome the Tobruk defences. But he understands that the British aren't going to sit there and just let him take Tobruk. With the German victory on Crete at the end of May, Rommel correctly guesses that Wavell is under immense pressure from London to produce a quick success in the desert. Therefore, Rommel strengthens his defences around the Halfaya Pass, giving the responsibility of defending this vital strategic position to one of the most interesting characters in the whole of the Afrika Korps, Back. Rommel isn't sure what to make of Back. An ex-clergyman, Back walks with a cane, but is cheerful, outgoing and smokes cigars. His soldiers refer to him as father, but in Rommel's eyes he looks like a bundle of military laundry. At this time, Rommel dislikes Back, but Rommel soon finds himself as one of Back's admirers because despite his appearance, Back fights hard. Back's in charge of 1st Battalion of the 104th Motorised Infantry Regiment, which is part of 15th Panzer Division. For his defence, Back hides 5 batteries of anti-tank guns at the height of the top of the Halfaya Pass, which includes 1 battery of 88mm guns. 1 company is placed towards the entrance down by the coastal road, itself laced with mines. Reinforcements are also sent to Sollum and Fort Capuzzo, and the soldiers copy the best parts they'd seen from the Tobruk defences when they create their own lines. Rommel also randomly stumbles across dozens of artillery pieces of various sizes, complete with ammunition, just sitting in the desert northwest of Bardia. These had been abandoned by Marshal Graziani 6 months previously, and have been sat there ever since Operation Compass. Rommel therefore issues orders to solidify his defences around Sollum, Halfaya and Sidi Omar with these guns. On the 6th of June, Lieutenant Seaborn's Signal Intelligence Section warns Rommel that British armour are moving into positions just east of Halfaya. British radio discipline has improved noticeably, and unlike during Operation Brevity, Seaborn is unable to confirm the details of the British order of battle. But Rommel knows of Tiger Convoy, and understands that the British will have a numerical superiority in tanks in the coming battle. He knows that the Matilda tank frightens German panzer crews because of its heavy armour. It's impervious to the 37mm Pak anti-tank gun and could bounce shots of the larger 50mm Pak anti-tank gun even at close range. The only effective German weapon against the Matildas are the 88mm guns. Therefore, Rommel orders his anti-tank guns, including the 88s, to be set up like they are the Halfaya Pass. He places them in other tactical positions, like the Hafid Ridge. In addition, Rommel has learnt a valuable and critical lesson from Operation Brevity. He saw how effective von Herf's defence near Fort Capuzzo was, and this solidifies his own ideas about the coordination of tanks and anti-tank guns on the battlefield. As we have seen, the German Panzer III and IV tanks are superior overall to the British tanks. Rommel's view, shared by the majority of German panzer leaders, is that his panzers should be used to find weak places in enemy defences, break through, and then exploit into the unprotected rear areas. Their role is not to fight enemy tanks. They can fight enemy tanks, but that's not their primary purpose. In Rommel's mind, artillery should fight tanks. This means that the German tactics can effectively be summed up as tanks beat infantry, guns beat tanks, and infantry capture artillery positions. This reality spurs Rommel to develop more flexible tactics for his anti-tank guns. Rommel's new tactic, born out of Brevity and used for the first time in Battleaxe, is to draw the British forwards by retreating his own tanks, and then he hits them with previously hidden anti-tank guns. By finishing off the lighter tanks with his pack guns, the 88s can take out the Matildas from afar. This ploy would become the standard Axis tactic for the remainder of the war in North Africa. But even with this advance in tactics, Rommel's greatest worry isn't the tank battle, but the fuel stocks he has in which to fight it. Unfortunately, our petrol stocks were badly depleted, and it was with some anxiety that we contemplated the coming British attack. For we knew that our moves would be decided more by the petrol gauge than by tactical requirements. On the night of June 14th, Peter is transmitted to all British units, and then the British go quiet. Seaborn's subordinates recall the identical use of the name Fritz immediately before Brevity, and Seaborn informs Rommel. The alert goes out to the German and Italian units at both the Egyptian frontier and the Tobruk perimeter. And Battleaxe begins. Pre-arranged German artillery fire lands on the Australians in the Tobruk perimeter in order to keep their heads down. Rommel does not know if they will attempt a breakout or not, and so plays it safe. Luckily for him, the Australians have no orders to break out, meaning that he can concentrate on the frontier for the remainder of the battle. At 0400 hours on June 15th, the British set off from their start point. By 0600 hours, the Coast Force moves into the Halfaya Pass from both the top of the escarpment and the bottom of the escarpment, trapping back forces within. The 2 battalions of Indian infantry, supported by half a dozen Matilda tanks of B Squadron, with A Squadron in reserve, attack the lower part of the pass. Running directly into mines, machine guns and anti-tank positions, 4 of the 6 tanks of B Squadron fall to mines, and the 2 Indian battalions are pinned down by heavy German machine gun fire. Their final 2 Matildas get stuck behind the wrecks of the other 4 tanks and can only provide support, as the 2 battalions of Indian infantry take heavy losses and make no gains. At the top of the escarpment, C Squadron, with another dozen Matildas, and 2nd Battalion Cameron Highlanders prepare to move into the pass. They pause when they realise that their battery of guns are bogged down and are unable to provide them with covering fire. Deciding to press on regardless, the Camerons attack, but the Germans open fire. Their tanks are hit by hidden 88mm guns, and C Squadron is mauled. The German 88s are in stone-built sangars, with only their muzzles visible, and completely disguised until they open fire. C Squadron's commander in 4th Royal Tank Regiment, Major Miles, is last heard on the regimental wireless reporting that the 88mm are, quote, tearing my tanks apart. At around 10 AM, the attack stalls after serious losses. Then German armoured cars and lorried infantry set up for a counterattack at the head of the pass. They charge, overrunning one company and chasing the remainder away from the pass. The Camerons with C Squadron now have only one Matilda and one light tank left. The British can do little but wait for darkness and watch the battle being fought out below them. Despite being cut off by British forces, Back checks the British and Indian attacks, and as a result of his successful defence, the British now nicknamed their Halfaya Pass Hellfire Pass. Major Back and his men fought magnificently. The British force engaged in this attack was soon describing its position as serious and complaining of heavy casualties. In the centre, the escarpment force advances. Matildas of 7th Royal Tank Regiment bypass point 206, knowing it's strongly held. They pause by the wire until 22nd Guards Brigade catches up, and then they sweep across the frontier. They reach Capuzzo just before noon, with the Guards Brigade trailing behind them. The Matildas attack Capuzzo on their own and chase the German garrison away, but suddenly find themselves under constant counterattack. It was here for the first time that Rommel showed the deft touch that would characterise so many of his tank battles in North Africa. Rommel commits 1st Battalion of the 8th Panzer Regiment to a counterattack at Fort Capuzzo. The German tanks engage briefly and then withdraw in apparent disorder, luring the pursuing British tanks into a concealed line of anti-tank guns. Using this tactic, Rommel reduces the number of Matildas and keeps the British armour occupied, while he moves 5th Light Division from Tobruk to Sidi Azai's. The British repel the Panzers, but 5 Matildas are knocked out and another 4 are damaged. The Guards infantry finally come up and consolidate the position and successfully fight off a strong counterattack by around 1830 hours. With Capuzzo in British hands, 2nd Scots Guards move on to capture the outpost of Merced, and a total of 500 enemy soldiers are marched off to the rear. According to one source, which admits it may not be true, so don't take this part as fact, a group of Matildas break through past Capuzzo and advance towards Bardia. With British tanks bearing down upon them, a German officer halts a supply column containing 88mm guns, destined for the air defence at Bardia. Desperately setting them up, they fire back at the Matildas. By the end of the engagement, only one 88mm remains, but the officer is awarded with the Knight's Cross for his quick thinking. It might be true since the shortage of radios mean that the British have been reduced to 1 set per squadron, and since not all Matildas are accounted for at the end of the battle and not all had radios, it is possible that this action happened. But again, only one source says it's true and then admits it may not be. Behind Capuzzo, A Squadron of 4th Royal Tank Regiment captures battle point 38, taking 200 prisoners and 8 field guns. But then they come across the well-fortified position of point 206, which 7th Royal Tank Regiment had bypassed earlier. Twice this position changes hands, with German anti-tank guns knocking out 8 of the Matildas before the end of the day. It's only when B Squadron, as a reserve, moves forwards in the evening, and with the addition of 6 more Matildas, that point 206 finally falls and is firmly in British hands. On the desert flank, 7th Armoured Brigade advances, while Strafe's support group guards the southwest. To keep the new Crusader tanks as a surprise, 2nd Royal Tank Regiment leads with their older cruisers, while 6th Royal Tank Regiment trails behind. They approach the Hafid Ridge at 0900 hours, and the Germans open fire. It's then that 7th Armoured Brigade realise they have no artillery support, because all the guns are in the support group, which is concentrating on protecting 7th Armoured Brigade's flank. The British do take the first ridge though. However, due to a shortage of radios, they can't communicate with 5 tanks, and these sweep on and are never seen again. It's then that they realise that the ridge isn't one ridge, but 3. Prior reconnaissance has failed to reveal that the Hafid Ridge is in fact 3 ridges, all of which the Germans have prepared for their defence. The successful British cruisers cross over the first ridge and are peppered by German anti-tank guns firing at point-blank range. The two tank regiments, with no supporting artillery, know that the 2-pounder guns on their tanks lack high explosive shells. Since anti-tank rounds need to score a direct hit, the British have no effective way of suppressing the Germans other than with their machine guns. Taking heavy fire, the British pulled back and decided to move to the flanks of the ridgeline instead of directly over it. The German gunners are caught looking the wrong way and are hit by British machine guns, leaving the Germans scrambling to turn their guns around. However, concealed 88mm guns in the rear begin picking off the British tanks at long range, ending the carnage amongst the German gun crews. 7th Armoured Division now only has 48 of its original 82 tanks left, and at this moment a report comes in from the RAF warning 7th Armoured that enemy panzers are approaching. So the British tanks pulled back across the ridge and await the panzers in favourable terrain. Rommel does bring 5th Light Division to Sidi Azeiz and prepares to counterattack. But the counterattack doesn't come. Instead, the British spot German anti-tank guns being towed away from the 2nd Ridge. 2nd Royal Tank Regiment are encouraged. The Germans are pulling back. They move their Crusader tanks up to the top of the first crest and confirm that the Germans are definitely retreating. So they decide to charge after them. As they cross the next ridge, they come under a storm of fire from the German anti-tank guns, including the 88s. The withdrawal is another ruse. It's now that a battalion of tanks from 5th Panzer Regiment moves up, and 6th Royal Tank Regiment is now fighting with Panzer 3s and 4s whilst being hit by anti-tank fire. Within minutes, 11 Crusader tanks are knocked out and 6 more badly damaged. 7th Armoured Brigade loses a quarter of their surviving tanks in this fight. The Crusaders displayed an alarming tendency to catch fire when hit, and by the end of the first day, 7th Armoured Division's tank strength had fallen by half. The British retreat slightly, and the two sides engage each other at long distances until the early evening when 7th Armoured Division withdraws from the Hafid Ridge. The first day of Battleaxe is over and the British have only gained one of the day's objectives, Fort Capuzzo. The Halfaya Pass is still in German hands and the British have been checked at the Hafid Ridge. Back and his gunners continue to hold the Halfaya Pass, although they are cut off from the British and their ammunition stocks are slowly depleting. As much as a third to even a half of all British tank strength is gone. Some are repaired and sent back to the front. But the tanks lost at the Hafid Ridge are written off entirely, with a few falling into German hands by the end of the engagement. British tactics have clearly failed, and by avoiding a tank versus tank engagement, Rommel skillfully reduces the British tank strength significantly, even before the bulk of his own armoured force is concentrated. Rommel on the 16th of June 1941. Dearest Lou, there was heavy fighting in our eastern sector all day yesterday, as you will have seen long ago from Wehrmacht communiques. Today, it's 2:30 AM, we'll see the decision. It's going to be a hard fight, so you'll understand I can't sleep. These lines in haste will show you that I'm thinking of you both, more soon when it's all over. At the end of the first day of the battle, Eden notes in his diary, the opening phases of Libya appear to have gone quite well. I wish I could rid myself of this sinking feeling that we should have concentrated on Syria first, and that task accomplished, switch to Libya. I fear that we may not be strong enough for decisive results in either theatre, but hope this is too gloomy a view. At the beginning of the second day, 7th Armoured Brigade's 2nd Royal Tank Regiment has only 28 cruiser tanks left. 4th Armoured Brigade has 37 of the 100 Matilda tanks left, although another 11 are being repaired. But back in Sidi Barrani, Beresford Pierce decides that because Fort Capuzzo is already in British hands, the best plan is to maintain Battleaxe's original objectives. Despite the losses sustained so far, Beresford Pierce wants to renew the attacks on both the Hellfire Pass and the Hafid Ridge. He orders 11th Infantry Brigade to attack the Halfaya Pass again, while 22nd Guards Brigade stands in place in the centre, ready to respond to any German counterattack. He also decides that 4th Armoured Brigade is to link up with the rest of 7th Armoured Division near the Hafid Ridge, so they'll be ready to tackle the German panzers whenever they materialise. 7th Armoured Brigade will need the Matilda tanks, as most of the Crusaders have been knocked out or have broken down. But with their powers combined, the British intend to engage and then cripple the German armoured force, paving the way to Tobruk. Beresford-Pearce hopes that they still have time to turn Battleaxe into a success. If only they could draw the German panzers into battle. Most of the 5th Light Division is at Sidier's Eyes by this point, and one battalion has arrived at the Hafid Ridge in the evening of the 15th and has successfully combated the British there. But Rommel is concerned by the isolation of Major Back's forces at Halfaya and the known destruction of artillery and infantry positions along the Hafid Ridge. It's also suspected that they've lost Point 206. The good news is though that overnight a complete list of the Western Desert Force's call signs and unit code names is found in a knocked out British armoured car. Seaborn and his staff use this list to put together an accurate estimation of British unit strengths and intentions, which Rommel then exploits. Rommel knows that the British are trying to join their armoured formations up so they can combine their tanks and engage Rommel's panzers. Rommel has no intention of allowing a tank-on-tank battle to happen, since he doesn't believe the purpose of armour is to fight armour. As mentioned earlier, in his opinion, artillery should fight tanks, infantry should capture artillery positions, and tanks should exploit through the weak points in the enemy defences. So what he plans to do is pin 4th Armoured Brigade in place and prevent them reinforcing the rest of 7th Armoured Division. In the centre, Neumann Cyclo of 15th Panzer Division has kept his panzers back from the battle area on Rommel's orders. Rommel now decides to commit them in an all-out attack against Fort Capuzzo. The British will be forced to commit their reserves in the centre to combat this German attack. With the British reserves committed there, the time will be right to send 5th Light Division south, almost to Sidi Omar, and then turn east. Effectively, 5th Light Division will swing around the British left flank and strike into their rear, exploiting a weakness in the British lines. This would then place his panzers in the rear of 22nd Guards Brigade and allow them to strike east and relieve Back's unit at Halfaya. Having relieved Back, the British will be trapped in a pocket and annihilated. This is Rommel's plan. Seaborn also believes that the British intend to begin their attack at dawn, so Rommel orders Neumann Cyclo to begin moving against Capuzzo before dawn. Rommel attacks first, determined to strike before the British. At 0400 hours, Neumann Cyclo forms 15th Panzer Division into 2 columns and moves against Fort Capuzzo in a pincer movement, hoping to encircle the British. As dawn breaks, the British find 80 panzers attacking their positions. But the British have fortified 5 Matildas and several 25-pounder field guns in sand dugouts around Capuzzo, and they begin firing on the incoming panzers. 4th Armoured Brigade is forced to reinforce the Capuzzo front and abandons its movement westward to reinforce 7th Armoured Division. However, the attack on Capuzzo develops in a way that Rommel regrets, as his panzers roll straight into the sight of British anti-tank guns. The battle rages for hours, and by 10 AM Neumann Cyclo reports his tank strength has fallen from 80 tanks to just 30. He says morale is falling fast. In the end, they're forced to fall back by noon. The British have knocked out 50 of the German tanks, stopped the attack, and Capuzzo remains in their hands. So absolute is this victory for the British that the 22nd Guards Brigade feels confident enough to send 2nd Battalion the Scots Guards forward from Merced to take Solon Barracks. 2nd Battalion Scots Guards captures Solon Barracks on the escarpment and forms an effective block to any German attempt to relieve Back from the north. But the German attack does draw forces away from the coast force, which makes no progress against Back, and stops 4th Armoured Brigade from reinforcing 7th Armoured Division on the desert flank. Meanwhile, at dawn, 5th Light Division moves south past the west edge of the Hafid Ridge. It's shadowed by the armoured cars and light tanks of the 2nd Royal Tank Regiment, who attempt to pick off the soft-skinned German transport vehicles. A battle of manoeuvre ensues, as the 7th Armoured Brigade and, finally able to commit once the battle reaches Sidi Omar, the support group engage with their artillery. This turns into a fluid battle that requires the commanders of both sides to be flexible, as if the battle was being fought at sea. Some success is gained by the British at first, but at a cost. Early in the day, 2nd and 6th Royal Tank Regiments charge a column of enemy transport and force it out into the desert, scoring a quick victory. Another column of transport is also dispersed a little later on, littering the field with burning trucks. But when the British try to fight the panzers, the results are disastrous. German panzers once again feign a withdrawal and lead the British into an anti-tank gun ambush. The Panzer Mark IVs have a short barrel 75mm gun, which is only really useful for taking out artillery and infantry with their high explosive shells. However, it can engage at 3,000 yards, far sooner than the British can engage with their own tanks, whose 2-pounders have an effective range of around 500 yards. This meant that when the British see the Germans starting to come towards them to engage, the support group have to quickly offload their 25-pounders. They have to set them up, which takes about 3 minutes to do, and then they can use them to fire at the Germans, since they're the only weapon that they have that can hit them over 500 yards. The problem is that the Panzer IVs start firing HE rounds at the artillery as they're moving towards them from around 3,000 yards. This leaves the 25-pounders with only a few minutes to fire at the German tanks until they have to pull out. British tanks are then sitting ducks for 75mm HE fire until both sides close within 500 yards. Several frustrated British tank gunners fire their solid shot anti-tank rounds at ranges of 1,000 yards or more. But realistically, they could only do superficial damage to the panzers at that range. There is little else they can do. Worse, in this battle of manoeuvre, the British cruisers keep breaking down, meaning that as the battle wears on, they lose a lot more tanks than the Germans. By noon, the commander of 6th Royal Tank Regiment withdraws his Crusaders to the wire for refuelling and replenishment. He finds he has only 10 tanks left. Strafer uses his artillery to help thwart an attempt by the Germans to outflank the brigade and drive a wedge between 2nd and 6th Royal Tank Regiments. 2nd Royal Tank Regiment fight a desperate rearguard action to enable the support group to withdraw. And by the mid-afternoon, both Royal Tank Regiments are back across the frontier, around 6 miles apart, with the support group further back. And from here they watch the massing of the panzers along the wire, unable to interfere as only 21 tanks remain in 7th Armoured Brigade. At 1900 hours, as the light fades, the Germans attack again. The Crusaders have to wait under heavy fire as the panzers approached, watched by the support group at the rear who are unable to help them. The first attack concentrates on the Crusaders of 6th Royal Tank Regiment, but then the panzers turn and aim at 2nd Royal Tank Regiment, who have even older and lighter tanks. They're only spared complete annihilation by the fading light. June 16, 1941 was the day that the British tank crews first realised that their own experts on armoured warfare had been outthought by Hitler's. By nightfall, 7th Armoured Division has lost more than half its cruiser tanks and has fallen back behind the wire at the Egyptian frontier, their starting point. Overnight, Rommel interprets this withdrawal to mean that the British left flank is crumbling and feels the time is right to shift his weight to the western flank. He has up to this point left things to his divisional commanders, but now decides to take personal command of the battle. He orders Newman Cyclo to leave a small covering force to contain the British at Capuzzo, and bring the rest of 15th Panzer Division around to the south to take up position on the left flank of the 5th Light Division. Therefore, overnight on the 16th and 17th, Rommel concentrates both 5th Light and 15th Panzer Divisions on the west flank of the battlefield and readies them to strike hard at 0430 hours. At 0430 hours on the 17th of June, both Panzer Divisions strike at the left flank of the 7th Armoured Division. 75 Panzers, supported by artillery and anti-tank guns, drive straight through the British lines. The British don't realise what Rommel has done until 0600 hours on June 17th, when the full weight of all his panzers smash their left flank. The weak and exhausted screens west of Sidi Suleiman are broke and fall back towards the escarpment and Halfaya. Kray is the first to realise the danger. By now, he has withdrawn his divisional HQ to Elam al-Fakri, 25 miles east of the wire and well behind the forward units. From here, he sends a message at 0930 hours to Beresford Pierce requesting advice and orders. Cray tells Beresford Pierce, who is even further back and out of touch with the battle, that he should come up and look at the situation himself. This message is picked up by Rommel, who remarks, "It sounded suspiciously as though the British commander no longer felt himself capable of handling the situation." Cray's message is also picked up by General Wavell, who happened to be at Beresford Pierce's headquarters. With the Western Desert Force in danger, Wavell decides he needs to take command of the situation. Perhaps he concludes the same as Rommel, that the British generals have lost control of the battle. Either way, he hops in a light Magister aircraft which sets off towards Halfaya House, flying low to the ground the whole way to avoid a run-in with the German fighters. As Wavell flies, he realises that the battle has been controlled entirely through Cray and Messervy almost from the beginning, since Beresford Pierce had been too far back to be in touch with the reality in the field. On the one hand, having these two divisional commanders in command actually has the benefit of foxing Rommel's intelligence services because these two generals speak to each other in Hindustani. On the other hand, command is split between two commanders, preventing the entire force operating as one. When the panzers reach a position just 10 miles from Halfaya and Back's positions, General Messervy at Capuzzo realises the danger his infantry are in. Messervy decides to ignore Beresford Pierce's instructions from the night before, which ask him to dispatch 4th Armoured Brigade to support 7th Armoured Brigade. Instead, he uses the Matildas to form a screen that slows Rommel's panzers enough to allow his infantry and 22nd Guards Brigade to withdraw. At 1100 hours, Messervy contacts Cray and tells him that he is in fact withdrawing from Capuzzo and Halfaya. By the time Wavell arrives at 1145 hours, the decisive decision to withdraw has been made in his absence. This is a decision that has a major impact on Wavell, the future of the North African campaign, the Middle East and the war as a whole. When Wavell and Beresford Pierce arrive at Cray's headquarters, it's far too late to change the order, and Wavell has little option other than to rubber stamp the decision. When Messervy makes his decision to withdraw, Wavell says, "I think you were right to withdraw in the circumstances, but orders should have come from the Western Desert Force." A remark which underlined the hollowness of a situation in which junior officers could be right in usurping the responsibilities of their seniors. With Rommel's panzers just 10 miles from Hellfire Pass and Back's positions, the tactical advantage temporarily swings back to the British. The Crusader tanks fall back to the support group on the southern flank, while the heavily armoured Matildas come up to the front. With their combined firepower, they blunt the German attack. The Germans can't bring up the 88mm guns in this position and are unable to tackle the Matildas. Now, the British 25-pounders are finally able to get to grips with the panzers. The combined forces of 4th and 7th Armoured Brigades and the support group fight a 6-hour battle against the two German divisions, aided by the RAF. With this blocking force, 22nd Guards Brigade and the 11th Indian Infantry Brigade are able to withdraw. By midday though, 7th Armoured Division as a whole is down to less than 40 tanks. So once the infantry fall back, the tanks withdraw, and at 1600 hours the Germans are able to move forwards, finally reaching Back's forces. Rommel's trap comes up empty, as the British are completely withdrawn. Rommel is furious that the British have escaped, believing that his divisions had reached Halfaya in time to prevent the British withdrawal. The Germans have lost 12 tanks completely, with 50 more disabled or broken down. But all of these 50 damaged tanks were later recovered and repaired, so really they only lost 12 tanks. And they'd captured British tanks as well. For the British, the situation is not good. They'd suffered fewer than 1,000 casualties, but 91 tanks, with some sources saying 98, have been lost, and nearly 80% of British tanks are out of action after just 3 days. Many have broken down or have worn out, and many have simply been abandoned. A large number of British trucks are also captured by the Germans. British troops feel that the attack hasn't been well handled. For the Royal Tank Regiment, Battleaxe became a byword for blundering. The British had suffered yet another defeat, There was no other way to describe the outcome of Battleaxe. They had no reserves left. Tobruk was still besieged, and the road to Alexandria lay wide open to the Afrika Korps. Only his critical supply situation would keep Rommel from advancing into Egypt. There are many reasons for the failure of Battleaxe, but what is the decisive reason? For some historians, Rommel's tactics are the main reason the British failed at Battleaxe. The tactic of drawing the British tanks onto the anti-tank guns, notably the 88mm, and then counter-attacking with his panzers had proved decisive during Battleaxe and would do so again in the future. And as Rommel puts it, German success was in large measure due to their adroit emplacement and employment of 88mm anti-aircraft guns in a ground defence role. The British themselves decide that the reason Battleaxe fails is because the Matildas are vulnerable to the German anti-tank guns, which have a longer range than the Matilda's 2-pounders. Other historians conclude that the main reason for the British failure is because of their general equipment inferiority. The Crusaders are deemed inadequate. German 88mm anti-tank guns are more than capable of taking out even the thick armoured Matilda at 2,000 yards or more. Even the 50mm pack guns can knock out the British tanks at 1,000 yards or more. This superiority in the quality of weaponry matched with the tactical deployment of anti-tank guns was to be a feature of Afrika Korps actions throughout the Desert War. In reality, there's a discrepancy in the source material. Some claim that the British were complaining that their tanks were inferior to the German tanks, while others claim that this was not the case. Neeland states in his book that at this stage there were no reports, as there would be later, that the British 2-pounders were inferior to the 50mm guns mounted on the Panzer IIIs. Whereas Rao in his book says, perhaps of greater significance, the British thought that their tank casualties were due primarily to an inferiority of German armour. For other historians, the failure is because the battle is rushed and the British weren't able to set up their forces adequately. The organisation of the armoured brigades is deemed as flawed. The mix of slow-moving Matilda tanks and the faster Crusader tanks meant that they didn't work well together. The lack of training was also seen as decisive, and the influence Churchill had on this was crucial. Brilliant man though he was, Churchill was not a general, and when he interfered, he made difficult situations worse. In this case, Churchill's haste was a factor in the defeat, and it cost Wavell his job, although not his reputation. It's also interesting to note that Beresford Pierce led from miles behind the lines and let his 2 divisional commanders do the work. It's interesting because this isn't the first time the British split command among several commanders. The same thing happened during Rommel's first desert offensive in North Africa. Initially, Rommel also let his 2 divisional commanders do the work, but then at the critical time decided to take charge and lead his men directly. This resulted in a decisive unity of command at a critical point in the battle when the British themselves were suffering under a command crisis. Was this perhaps the main reason for the German victory? No matter what the decisive factor was in the defeat of Battleaxe, for the British there was no going back now. Worse, the British do not learn from their defeat. As Rao puts it, it would take months before the British determined the actual reasons for their defeat in Battleaxe and took steps to rectify their shortcomings. A few days after Battleaxe, Wavell's aide walks into the chief's office and finds Wavell playing with a stack of coloured pencils, depressed. This was the only time I saw Archie Wavell in tears. Churchill is furious with the results of Battleaxe. He had stripped Britain of her defences, ignored the advice of his chief of staff, and had dared to send a convoy, his Tiger Cubs, through the Axis-held Mediterranean for nothing. He had earlier warned Wavell that only the success of Battleaxe could vindicate the earlier setbacks of Greece and Crete and permit him to regain a measure of the Prime Minister's trust and confidence. The failure of Battleaxe provided Churchill with the opportunity he needed to relieve Wavell. On the 21st of June 1941, General Sir Archibald Wavell is told that he has to go. He is to be replaced in North Africa by General Sir Claude Auchinleck, previously the Commander-in-Chief in India. Basically, they swap roles. Wavell is shaving, when the news of the Prime Minister's decision to relieve him of his command and send him to India is read to him on the morning of June 22nd. The Prime Minister's quite right. This job needs a new eye and a new hand. Auchinleck says this when he replaces Wavell. In no sense do I wish to infer that I found an unsatisfactory situation on my arrival. Far from it. Not only was I greatly impressed by the solid foundations laid by my predecessor, but I was also able the better to appreciate the vastness of the problems with which he had been confronted and the greatness of his achievements. In a command in which some 40 different languages are spoken by British and Allied forces. The Western Desert Force changes its title to 8 Corps. Beresford Pierce is sacked, as is Cray. Beresford Pierce's replacement is Lieutenant General Godwin Austin, who had commanded British forces in British Somaliland. Cray's replacement is Brigadier Strafer Gott, who is promoted to Major General and takes command of 7th Armoured Division. Strafer Gott was one of the very few to emerge from this debacle with his reputation intact. Campbell, one of Strafer's subordinates, is promoted to Brigadier and now commands the support group. Battleaxe is over. The British have failed to throw Rommel out of Africa, and their fears of German panzers rolling into the Middle East remain. However, the war is about to take a very different turn. Just a few days after Battleaxe ends, Churchill states, "So now this bloodthirsty gutter snipe must launch his mechanised armies upon new fields of slaughter, pillage and devastation." Here are the sources I use for this video. And here are the Patreon users who helped make this video possible. Thank you, you guys are awesome. If you'd like to help me make these Battlestorm videos as good as they can be and get your name in these videos, consider supporting me on Patreon. The amount of research required is insane, so your support is vital. I have other Battlestorm videos on my channel and I'm currently working on more. Stalingrad is coming. Links all over the place. Check the description of this video for more information and don't forget to subscribe for more. Thanks for watching, bye for now.